So how do we approach the symbols? We got all these strange symbols in our dreams. What do we do with them? Just quickly, there's three main approaches amongst Christians that we've been aware of, and all of them seem to fall into these three. The Jungian Christian approach is an approach that uses some of the teaching of Carl Jung and his anima, animus, and shadow figures. And if you've done any studying on dreams, some of these terms will be familiar. I used to be really dead set against it because it was Carl Jung, and Carl Jung was into channeling and had spirit guides and stuff. There's some talk that he became a Christian later on, I don't know. But using that approach in dreams gives me some difficulty because the disciples didn't have it, didn't have the benefit of Jung, and neither did Joseph and his brothers. And so to build it on that, I think it could be misleading. But at the same time, I believe that God is big enough that if that's what you're used to, He'll make the dream fit what you're used to, because He wants you to get the message. It's the message that's important. And so if you're used to that and if it works for you, God bless you. If you're new to this, it gets to be a little bit hard to understand. And I just find our approach a lot easier. The other approach is a strict biblical approach, and that suggests that every time you run into a symbol in your dream, that wherever there's a biblical counterpart, it has to be the same as in the Bible. And I have a lot of problems with that too, because one guy was telling me about a dream, and he had water was dripping on the church, on the people inside this church, and somebody who believed in this method said, "Well, that's the Holy Spirit," and it sounds great, except when you listen to the rest of the dream, the guy went to the roof, and there was a dumpster on the roof, and the water was leaking out of this dumpster, and so no, you don't want to use that. So you want to be careful. What we like is what we call the personal relational approach. And that basically is that God uses your life experiences to create this little movie to give you a message. It's your experiences. So these symbols become personal to you. Now that becomes interesting, because when I try and help interpret people's dreams, I can't give you what those symbols mean to me. That would be misleading. I need to draw from you what those symbols mean to you. If I had a bad experience with dogs in my youth, dogs would be a bad symbol. If dogs have always been your friend, then it would be a good symbol for you. And in those ways, if you were a carpenter, a house would mean something different to you than a homemaker. And so we need to be aware of the subtleties and the differences. And for that reason, it's really hard to come up with a dream dictionary. If you have this symbol, it means this. In fact, you can be misled taking that approach. In our book, Dream Dreams, we have a small list, and we state that you're not to use this as a dictionary, but as a guide to how to look at your dreams. Some of the different ways that they could be used in your life, but you need to find the personal way of looking at the symbols. You remember this one? Peter's in a trance on a roof at Joppa, and he has this vision of this sheet coming down out of heaven. How is this personal? Well, if you went to the Greek, the word for sheet in Greek is the word athone, and it's also the word that was commonly used by sailors to describe their sail. You know, it's time to roll down the athone, and that would be what they would say. How is that personal to Peter? He was a fisherman. He'd probably unfurled a lot of sails in his days, and seeing a sail coming down out of heaven would have caught his attention. And being full of animals, unclean animals, that was where the message was. But the sail it was a personal symbol, would have caught his attention. And you know the rest of the story, that the Gentiles came to the door and knocked on the door asking for Peter, and just like the dream said, he went out, killed, and ate them. No, he realized that there was symbolism in this, and that's not what it meant. That was a good thing. There's some interesting things I can't resist sharing with you. This is kind of neat. This happened in Joppa, right? It's a coastal city. What else happened in Joppa that you're aware of? I'll make this short. Jonah, remember Jonah? He went to Joppa. And what did God ask Jonah to do? Go to the Nineveh, the Gentiles, and speak to them. And he didn't want to do it. And he took off and he went fishing. 3-day stay in a resort. Now, what's Peter's last name? Bar Jonah. It's just a coincidence. Don't make anything of it. What did Peter have to do? Speak to the Gentiles. And he was obedient. God, there's so many of those little just coincidences that you remember. This one kind of caught my attention when I was studying. Nebuchadnezzar had this dream of this tree, this huge tree, and everything was gathering under its branches. And then this angel came down and cut it down, and the tree, and it represented what he was going to go through for 7 years. And I wondered to myself, what would someone the stature of King Nebuchadnezzar have to do with trees? How is that a personal symbol to him? I was kind of bothered by that because, this is either true and it works, or I might as well look for something else. And I was asking the Lord, what's the connection? And what came to mind suddenly, thought dropped into my mind, was one of the 7 wonders of the world. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Who it was that built that? Nebuchadnezzar for his wife. And when he had this dream, it may have been Tree Week or something. They were planting trees, I don't know. But suddenly there's this personal attachment to the symbols. The sail was a personal symbol to Peter. Other examples of personal symbols. You remember Joseph in prison, the baker had the dream of bread, loaves of bread. The cupbearer had the dream of the grapes, and he squeezed the grapes, personal symbols. Nebuchadnezzar's tree, I mentioned. Joseph's sheaves. Did Joseph ever do a sheave in his life, do you think? He's probably sick of them. He probably would have done lots of sheaves in his day. So they were a personal symbol. Jesus went up to Matthew and said, "Follow me and I'll make you fishers of men." Right? No. Matthew was the tax collector. Who did he say that to? I'm bad, aren't I? He said that to Peter and James, fishermen. A personal symbol. And there's all kinds of that. It just seems to be how God speaks to us, using things that mean something to us. I had a dream. In this dream, I was on the beach, and I was looking, and I saw this koala in the beach, and it looked like it was dead. It was half buried in the sand. And my sister went over and grabbed it by the ear and pulled it out of the sand. And as she did that, it started to squirm and wiggle. So she let it go, and it fell to the ground and crawled or walked over. If you've ever seen a koala, they're slow. Over to a tree and started steadily to climb up a tree. And then I woke up. Anybody here dream about koalas? No. How could that be a personal symbol? Well, I've already told you a little bit that I did spend some time in Australia. I had this dream about 3 months into the teacher exchange process. And we were waiting for the paperwork to be approved and everything else. And I had this dream. And so we decided God's trying to tell us something. We better make some phone calls, do some praying. We found that the process was stuck. And by our phone calls, we were able to give them the answers, the information they needed, and then got the process going again. And God used a dream to get our attention. Now, if I didn't have regard for dreams, who knows?